Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Right, this afternoon, I thought it was time to do something slightly different. Let's look at a distillery that doesn't begin with B, okay? No, what we're going to look at is grain whisky. Now, I mean, I love grain whisky, big fan of grain whisky. And the problem is with grain whisky is it's seen as an industrial product. The distilleries are immense behemoths that pump this stuff out, and it goes into your blends. And if you buy a cheap blended whisky, you know that, well, sometimes as low as or as much as 90% of that blend is going to be young, spirity, inexpensive grain whisky. And because the malt, obviously the malt component is the most expensive part of it, so to keep the cost down you get lots of cheap young grain, and cheap young grain is, well, pretty much like vodka really. It doesn't have any character, and it's had a bad rep, I think. And the thing is that it's produced, like I said, it's produced in continuous stills. It comes off the stills at a pretty high ABV, sort of somewhere approaching sort of 80 odd percent. But the key to this is that this high alcohol percentage allows the grain whisky to mature for decades, and obviously spending that length of time in the wood, it does take up a lot of the wood, and they're not cheap obviously. And it's only been in the last I don't know, about 10 years or so that there has been a number of these grain whiskies appearing on the market, and very, very interesting they are too. And I'm hoping that today's little tasting will you know, highlight that fact to you. So let's talk about what we're going to taste this afternoon then. Right, okay. There's not very many of these grain distilleries left, and the one we're looking at this afternoon was closed in 2009, and it's the Port Dundas distillery. Now, Port Dundas is, or the distillery was located just north of Glasgow, just north of the junction 16 of the M8. In actual fact, it was founded in 1811. With a second distillery being built 2 years later. The two distilleries were merged in 1877 when they were purchased by the Distillers Company Limited. Had an interesting history, it has to be said. It was after the war. It was heavily modernised and re-equipped, before being bought, I believe, in 1966 by Scottish Grain Distillers Limited. The distillery itself produced grain whisky for a number of the most well-known blends. They included Haig, Johnny Walker, White Horse, J&B and Bell's, just to name a few. And it carried on production into the 70s when it was purchased by Diageo, who pumped about 7 million quid into it, which is a lot of money in the 70s. Full upgrading, and then 2009 they decided to close it. And when you think about things, with the supposed boom in whisky, maybe it was something they anyway, but they obviously can still source the grain whisky they need for their particular blends. And just to put it in perspective, at its height, the distillery was pumping out 30 million litres of spirit a year. I mean, that's huge. I mean, if you think about the largest, or the larger of the Scottish malt distilleries like Glenfiddich and Glenlivet, it's pumping out 3 times the quantity of that. So as you can see, this is where the whole idea of grain whisky being an industrial product came from, because essentially that's huge plants, pump it out, you know, use it in your cheap blends. But like I was alluding to a little bit earlier, it ages for decades. I mean, the oldest grain whisky I've tasted, which I haven't got this afternoon, but we may well taste at some stage in the future, is 50 years old, with still an alcohol content, you know, above 46%. You know, so it's impressive stuff. But anyway, enough about that. Let's introduce this afternoon's little lineup then, shall we? Right, okay, so the idea is that I've dug out 4 samples ranging in age from 21 years to 34 years. So hopefully this will kind of show how the spirit kind of progresses with age in the cask. And as a general rule of thumb, most single grain whiskies are really not mature enough until they're into their 20s, really. I mean, it was mad when you think about it. You know, you have a 20-year-old single malt whiskey which is just amazingly mature, and yet you taste a sort of, you know, say 15, 18-year-old grain whiskey, and it's just nothing there. You know, it's all spirit, maybe a bit of oak, but they certainly hasn't kind of sort of meshed together and gelled. So anyway, the first one we'll be looking at is this one. These are all bottled. Well, this one is bottled by Douglas Laing, and was in the old Clan Denny range. It's a 21-year-old, distilled in January 1992, bottled in March of 2013, and bottled at 55.7%. The second one we're looking at was bottled in the Directors Cut range. This was distilled in January of 81, bottled in November of 2011. That's making it 30 years old, and it was bottled at 58.7%. The third one we'll be looking at again was from the Clan Denny range. It was distilled in January of 1978, bottled in September 2011, making it 33 years old, and it was bottled at 54.2. And the final one, again from the Clan Denny range, was distilled in, again, January 1978, but bottled roughly about a year later in May 2012, and bottled at 58.6%. So there you have it. We'll start obviously with the 21-year-old and work our way up and see. Let's see what happens. Right, okay, so let's start with the 21. Let's see what the nose gives us on this. Now, as we were expecting, it is quite young in grain whiskey terms. It's quite neutral, but there's a little citrus sharpness, some gentle spice, and the beginnings of a dried fruit rancio. Now, hopefully what this will show is as grain whiskies get older, they obviously take up a lot of the oak because they spend 30 odd years in an oak cask. They also take up a lot of the oxidization notes, and they either tend to sort of go in a kind of a rum-like direction, or they tend to go in an old cognac kind of direction. So it'll be interesting to see how this one fares. There's a little bit of that dried fruit, a little bit of dusty spice, and you can sort of not necessarily smell the oak, you can sense it. You can sense the oak is definitely there, but it's not fully mature. It's not showing that sort of dustiness that you certainly tend to get with, say, older bourbon aged, say, Spays, for example. But it's a pleasant nose. There's a bit of toastiness, a little bit of caramel. It's, like I said, in grain terms, it's pretty much a bit of a baby, really. Palate. That's got vibrancy, a real nip. Now, the thing with grain whiskies, it's obviously distilled from a lot of other different grains, wheat, maize, rye, that kind of stuff, and it often tends to have this real spicy intensity. and this has got it by the bucketful. Not especially long, a little bit short, a sort of a medium kind of length. Initially you do get a little bit of the oak, a little bit of the sort of slightly toasted caramel, a bit of vanilla, a little bit of dried fruit, but it's all about the relative youth of the grain spirit and that real intense spicy nip. Nice aftertaste, quite chocolatey in actual fact. So again, kind of like the oak coming through sort of on the finish with that sort of, you know, a little bit of raisin and a lot of dark chocolate. So although it obviously doesn't have the major complexity of, say, a 20-year-old single malt, it is certainly really pleasant and really interesting. And when you think about it, what, 30-odd-year-old single grain is probably going to set you back, well, close to about 150 quid, whereas a 20-year-old is going to be about half that. So good value, really nice, like that. Right, okay, so moving up the age statements. This is the 30-year-old, bottled at 58.7. Oh, now, as you can see, that's taken on a lot more colour, but the oak is not big. I mean, some of the grains that you get can be very oaky, and they can go in an almost kind of bourbon-like character. Big oak, big vanillins. This is actually quite restrained. Again, a little bit of a dried fruit rancio, sort of slightly rum-like, a little bit like a not very oiled Guyanan, to be honest with you. It's got that intensity, that crispness, that focus of dried fruit. A little bit of spice, a little bit of floral notes coming through now. And all the while that oak, again, you can sense it, but you can smell it a little bit more with that sort of toasty vanilla. I mean, that is an absolutely fantastic nose. It's elegant, it's not over oak, really nicely balanced. And just beginning to show that sort of oxidation, that dried fruit, almost rum-like dried fruit. So, palate. Oh, that is gorgeous. Again, lovely spicy finish, but not quite so exuberant and intense. The oak is now sort of showing more, rounding off those edges. Again, lots of sort of dried fruit, sort of a little bit of sultana, apricot, that kind of the more sort of lighter dried fruit, not raisins and the darker fruits, but the sort of the lighter fruits. A little bit of caramel, a little bit of nuts. Quite a drying finish, but then obviously that's down to the level of alcohol. But the aftertaste, it just lingers and lingers. Absolutely stunning. Again, like I said, nice little sort of spiciness, but showing a little bit more complexity, a little bit more maturity. Fantastic stuff. Absolutely gorgeous. Right, okay, on to the 33-year-old. Obviously not an awful lot in this, but let's see how we get on with this. Again, quite elegant, dusty, very dusty, sort of lots of dusty spice. Again, a sort of a touch of dried fruits, again more in the sort of not satsuma, but more in the unraisin, the lighter dried fruit, shall we say. There's a little bit of toffee, a little bit more perfumed, a little bit more closed in as well. There's again, sort of very gently oxidised, nutty, quite floral, quite almost high toned, but not quite. It's more sort of a floral tone. Again, nicely balanced. There's a little bit of oiliness, a little bit of oak, maybe a little bit more creamy oak, a little bit more butter. Again, really complex, delicate dried fruits. Yeah, but this is more about the sort of buttery, creamy, toasty oak, and you can certainly sense that is coming through more on the nose of this one. Palate. Oh, that is mellow. That is gorgeous. Again, more of the oak, more toastiness, more butteriness, but it tastes darker. I mean, if I was tasting that blind, I would think there's possibly a bit of rye going in on there, and it has that sort of darker grain note to it. It's possible. I mean, it's probably unlikely that they would be using rye. I would imagine it would probably be mostly maize or corn, possibly. But it does have that rye-like darkness to it, a bit of toffee, a little bit of molasses kind of creeping in now. So it's, again, very much in the sort of rum-like style of things. Not quite so oily, and not quite so spicy, more softer on the spice now, more mellow. Glides, absolutely glides. That was a glorious bottling. I mean, that was from 2011, so I mean, none of these, as far as I'm aware, are still available, although the 21-year-old possibly could still be available. I think we actually even have, I think we've still got a couple of bottles of it in actual fact, about the 80-odd sort of quid mark, so, but that is just stunning, absolutely fantastic. Again, elegance, delicacy,
Promise of night, a promise that must be fulfilled.
And finally, the 34-year-old. Obviously, you would have thought a year isn't going to make a huge amount of difference, but well, let's see then, shall we? Oh, that's a big nose. Oh, boisterous, lots of oak. All very, very amplified. All very, very in your face, but again, really elegant. Lots of oily, grapey, dried fruits. Again, that sort of rum-like sort of character. A sort of, like I was saying, an almost lightly oiled Guyanan in style. Again, there's a little bit of nuttiness. An almost agricole-y, slightly vegetal note creeping in now. A little bit of citrus, a little bit of orange maybe, a little bit of sort of sugar-coated orange. Again, we're not. I mean, it's a big nose, but again, it's not sort of huge oak dominated. It's again really elegant, really fine, poised. That is stunningly good. But oh, that's a chewy old mouthful. A lot of tannin. Although again, really amazingly well balanced. It's not OTT in the tannin department. It gives you a little bit of coffee, a little bit of chocolatiness, but again you've got the ripe dried fruits kind of going in a little bit of a darker direction, a little bit of sort of date possibly, a little bit of walnut, a little bit of treacle, some nuttiness, gentle spice, slightly peppery, very long. I mean, I'm still tasting it now, and it's, you can feel the sort of the alcohol sort of just nipping at the edges of your mouth. That is just absolute sublime, amazing, amazing spirit. And again, just really well balanced. And I mean, I bang on about balance in spirits, and yeah, you can have impressive whiskies or spirits that are all just one-dimensional, and you sort of go, yeah, okay, that's one-dimensional. It's all oak, or it's all fruit, or it's all whatever. But you know, when you come across something that's just so balanced and harmonious as this, you just have to go, yeah. And it takes a while to unpick. You know, it's not a sort of a glugging whiskey. It's a whiskey sort of like savour. You warm up, you get the nuances, and it will change over time in the glass. But stunning, stunning, stunning. Right. Okay. So let's sum this little tasting up then. Grain whiskies, yeah, pretty damn good in actual fact. Port Dundas especially, you know, it's a shame that it's gone. I mean, I don't know, who knows why distilleries closed. Maybe it was that the upkeep was too much. I mean, you know, it's a huge plant, churning it out. It will obviously be missed because it's just such a wonderful spirit, just balanced, elegant. And as you see, very much in the sort of the rum-like style of grain whiskies. Even the younger one, obviously not the 21-year-old, doesn't have the complexity level of the 34-year-old, but you can taste it and you can see where it's going to go to. You can see that it has that sort of citrusness, that lightness, that elegance, that delicacy, which is the key to all these particular bottlings. They're not monstrous. They're quite restrained, and they're absolutely gorgeous. And if you want to try something a little bit different, you know, put your preconceptions about grain whiskey aside and get yourself one of these. I mean, there are a number of independents now bottling them. Duncan Taylor, obviously Hunter Lang, who obviously were Douglas, well, Douglas Laing still are Douglas Laing, and they probably still will be doing the Clan Denny range, and a few others as well. The Crow Up Rattray occasionally do them. So you know, they are available. They're not cheap. Like I said, you know, you're going to be shelling out you know, a good 3 figures on a sort of 35, 40-year-old grain whiskey, but I think when you balance that against what you'd pay for a 30 or 40-year-old single malt, they still are remarkable value for money. Like I said, young, they don't have the complexity, generally speaking, but you know, when they get old, they are absolutely fabulous stuff. So, so there you have it. I hope you've enjoyed this little tasting. I hope it kind of you know, gives you the desire to try and locate a bottle of grain whiskey, you know, whether it's young grain whiskey or old grain whiskey, and just give it a try, see what you think, because they're certainly interesting spirits. So anyway, I guess that's all about it for this afternoon. So just would like to wish you a good afternoon and good running.